So we have these three Department of Justice memos. One from 1973 and one from 2000 that says it's the position of the Department of Justice that you cannot indict a sitting president. And the liberals hate it. Mika and Joe, with a negative IQ combined of about 17, they say that Rudy says a president cannot be indicted. Well, Rudy just knows what those memos say, that a president cannot be indicted. So why do they lie about that? But then there's this other one, which is 2.5 pages long, and there's literally, as I went through it and I read it, one relevant paragraph. They go about saying what doesn't apply. The necessity doctrine doesn't apply. Don't worry about it. Just stick with me. The 25th Amendment doesn't apply. Then we have the legislative pardon. That's not relevant. The enactment of a plea as a bar to criminal prosecution. That's not relevant to the question of whether a sitting president can pardon himself. A concurrent resolution requesting the next president to grant a pardon. That has nothing to do with anything. Immunity resulting from testimony before congressional committees. That has nothing to do with anything. That's 94% of the memo, which is less than 2.5 pages long. There's one relevant sentence. Under the fundamental rule that no one may be a judge in his own case, it would seem that the question should be answered in the negative. It's not even definitive about whether a president can pardon himself. So if I embrace the other two memos and I say that that's the rule, and then I look at this and say, no, it's not, am I being a hypocrite? Is that contradictory? No. Stick with me. That's why you're here. Those other two memos apply to Mr. Mueller. Mr. Mueller is an employee of the United States Department of Justice. As a condition of his appointment, he must comply with the policies and regulations of the United States Department of Justice. He cannot go off on his own and indict the President of the United States in defiance of what his supervising department has as its policy, even putting the Constitution aside. Now, as for this memo, which is really pathetic, there are no footnotes to anything. There's a couple of asterisks where they cite themselves. So this was cobbled together very quickly at the 11th hour with an opinion based on nothing. But that doesn't even matter. Why? Because the President of the United States is not an employee of the Department of Justice. The President of the United States is not bound by the policies of the Department of Justice. He's bound by the Constitution. He is the executive branch. He is the Department of Justice. I know this is hard to understand given all the propaganda by the media demagogues out there. You won't find the Department of Justice in the Constitution. It came about in the mid-1800s. The FBI came about in the early part of the last century. The pardon power came first. The pardon power came before any federal codification of criminal laws. The Constitution came first. And so the President of the United States is not bound by this Mickey Mouse 2.5-page opinion of which one paragraph applies and really one sentence, and the one sentence is absurd. He can challenge this. He's not bound by this. This doesn't even make a serious argument. But Mr. Mueller is bound by the other two memos. Am I making sense, Mr. Producer? Mr. Mueller's an employee of the Department of Justice. The President of the United States was elected. He's not an employee of the Department of Justice. He is the executive branch. And so, this is why when you watch shows like The Morning Schmo on MSLSD, you're not going to get the facts, you're not going to get the law, you're not going to get history. You're going to get Trump haters who are now comparing him with mass murdering dictators. So how serious are you supposed to take Mr. Bulbous Nose Deliverance and his sidekick, the female Ed McMahon? How seriously are you supposed to take these people? Not at all, I would think. Not at all. And now I want to get to another audio clip. Not because I like audio clips. I actually don't like audio clips. I want to get to another audio clip here if I can get my damn computer working. Mr. Producer, the audio clip, if you will. Hold on here. Let's get rid of this. With Mara Liasson. Now, this was at the press conference today. Sandra Huckabee Sanders, but I want you to hear this. Because Mara Liasson thinks she has a point. And she raises this because a couple of schmoes on cable have said the same thing because they're equally ignorant. Go ahead.
Why the president tweeted that the special counsel law was totally unconstitutional. If that's the case, why is he allowing his own Justice Department to abide by it?
Look, scholars have raised a number of questions about the legality of the special counsel process. The president's made his views about the special counsel very clear, and the president knows that the special counsel isn't needed because, once again, he hasn't done anything wrong. There was no obstruction, no collusion, and no wrongdoing. However, we continue to cooperate.
You've never said the law itself was unconstitutional. How can he allow his own Justice Department to participate in something that's unconstitutional?
Once again, I addressed this. The scholars have raised a number of questions on it, and the president's made his views clear.
So Mara Liasson wants to know why he doesn't fire the special counsel because the special counsel's unconstitutional. Anybody know how to answer that? Why would Mara Liasson ask such a question like that? Because she wants him impeached and removed from office, correct? This is the reality the president lives in. The reality he lives in is he has a Democrat Party that's out for his scalp and has always been out for his scalp. He's got a Democrat Party that's out for his scalp and that has always been out for his scalp. And he has a whole bunch of Republicans who feel exactly the same way. And if he did, in fact, fire them, they know there would be a Saturday Night Massacre type reaction that there was when Nixon took steps. Right? That's why. She also said to him, why was the president in favor of the appointment of a special counsel, involving Hillary Clinton and so forth, but now he says the special counsel is unconstitutional? Anybody know how to answer that question? Well, that's not the question. Certain special counsel that are appointed are wholly constitutional. This one is not. Why? Because of the mandate that they're given. The mandate determines whether or not they're a principal officer of the federal government or an inferior officer of the federal government. We know this from a Supreme Court case that was decided some 30 years ago. The mandate is supposed to, under Justice Department regulations, which were not followed by Mr. Rosenstein. He's created this. There's supposed to be some specificity as to the criminal law that you're claiming was violated, as to the individuals, as to the groups, as to the entity, something. The Deputy Attorney General, I don't care if he's the acting Attorney General in this situation or not, he does not have the power to substitute the appointment clause of the Constitution by making his own appointment and giving some inferior employee this enormous power, turning him into a principal officer of the federal government. And when that is triggered, it requires the president to nominate and the Senate to confirm. So when Mr. Mueller walks around, in many cases more powerfully than a United States attorney, all of whom have to go through the Article 2 Appointments Clause process, it is Mr. Rosenstein who's committed the unconstitutional act. It's Mr. Rosenstein who's committed the unconstitutional act, either because he's dim-witted or he was in a rush to accommodate the Democrats, the media, and particularly Chuck Schumer, or for whatever reason. There doesn't even have to be a reason. The mandate that was given to Mr. Mueller is different than the mandate that existed under the prior statute, the Independent Counsel Act, or any special counsel since. Now you might say, what about Ken Starr? In each case, Ken Starr was given a subject area, Whitewater, or the Lewinsky case, with statutes, with names of individuals. And he didn't expand into these areas. The Attorney General at the time, Janet Reno, gave him these areas. Moreover, there was oversight, serious oversight. There was a court a division, it was called, an independent counsel division court. The members appointed by the Chief Justice of the United States under the statute. And you could raise concerns and go specifically to that court and get them heard quickly. How do I know? Because I had to deal with that court in the Iran-Contra matter, where we had another independent counsel. So that statute lapses, right? That statute lapses. So now we have these so-called regulatory special counsel, where an attorney general, in this case an acting attorney general, Rosenstein, can appoint them. Now, what's the reason that you appoint such a special counsel? To investigate matters where there might be a conflict of interest. But Mr. Rosenstein gave Mr. Mueller such broad authority. He not only violated the Appointments Clause of the Constitution, he seized power from the Attorney General of the United States and gave it to Mr. Mueller. Mr. Rosenstein doesn't have any such power. No specific criminal statute, no specific individuals, nothing. Mr. Rosenstein doesn't have the power to undermine the constitutional appointment process, the President and the Senate. We know in this case what the framers of the Constitution meant. People who are called principal officers by our nomenclature today. In other words, who have powerful, serious positions, are not just to be appointed by the President or just to be confirmed by the Senate. They wanted two branches of government involved. So the Senate, out of our bicameral Congress, and the President. President and the Senate. They certainly didn't think that some person who's appointed, nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate, would then have the power to appoint somebody even more powerful than himself. You can't steal that power from the President, from the Attorney General in terms of management, and the Senate. That's the problem. It's not that all special counsel are unconstitutional. They're not. It's that this one is unconstitutional, thanks to Mr. Rosenstein. Now, all these points raised by the Morning Schmo and his Ed McMahon female version, the reason I play them is because it's educational. Not they're educational, they're good foils. All these points. Well, they say you can't indict a sitting president. Who said that? The Department of Justice. Well, they say the appointment's unconstitutional. Based on what? The Constitution. And Mr. Rosenstein's defective appointment and Mr. Mueller. Well, now they say he can pardon himself. No, they don't. The Constitution says the President has plenary, that is, broad authority to pardon, and there's no exception for himself. So what these people are attacking, the media, almost to a man and woman, the Democrats, almost to a man and woman, they're attacking the Constitution. The President of the United States is not required to roll over or to get in a fetal position and accept the twists and turns and pretzel-like motives of the Democrats and the media and Mr. Mueller. These are all issues that he can raise in a court of law. And the only way you get to a pardon question at all is if Mr. Mueller violates the policy of the Department of Justice and brings an indictment, and Mr. Mueller violates the Constitution. Otherwise, there is no pardon issue. But, Mark, what about obstruction of justice? Just because people say something's obstruction of justice doesn't make it so. When a president is acting under his granted powers, his prerogative to fire his inferior employee, the director of the FBI, it cannot be obstruction of justice when he's exercising his duly constitutional powers. It cannot be. So to claim it is to claim a falsehood, to create a fabrication. Well, you think the president can't be charged with obstruction of justice? That's not obstruction of justice. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.